Who would make a better stand-up, DiNardo or Griffith?
Ooh, I think DiNardo. He's got some natural tendencies towards being funny. There's some shtick there with the old guy.
Well, and you're being polite. There's some loose screws. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I am being polite. I'm going to see him in several days here.
That was Allen Trieu, and this is On the Bench with Mike Hall. That's me. Allen Trieu is a longtime guest on the Big Ten Network when it comes to recruiting. He's been our main recruiting analyst on our annual signing day shows for years and years. His expertise comes from being a football talent scout for nearly 2 decades. His writing with 24/7 has long been excellent and widely respected, especially among the Midwestern states. But if you have seen him on our show, you know he's more than just a writer or a scout. He is funny and quick, legitimately. And that's not by accident. He's a professional comedian, too. He's done stand-up comedy for years, opening for big names like Maria Bamford, Tim Meadows, Pete Holmes, and many more. We'll dive into the stand-up in a bit, but I started by trying to figure out how he even got into football recruiting in the first place.
I started an NFL draft website in the 8th grade. It was my computer's project. And no one knew how old I was. And I got credentialed for the NFL Combine a couple of years later and went down. And that's how I got started. And then eventually somebody from what was Scout at the time happened upon the website, asked me if I wanted to do some draft stuff. And then I transitioned into the recruiting stuff.
You must have been out of your mind as a high schooler getting access to the Combine.
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Steelers fan. So when Bill Cowher was up at the podium, it took me pretty much the entire time he was up there to muster up the courage to ask a question. And then when I asked the question, he goes, "That's a really good question, actually." And it made my life. I still remember it to this day.
Oh, man, that is really gutsy. Like, where did you get that confidence as such a youngster?
It's either confidence or just plain naive stupidity. The internet was a lot smaller back then too. So, they credentialed me. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years after that, I applied for a credential again. And they were like, "No, not this time." And I was like, "Why?" And it was because they had so many more people applying then. I think I just kind of right place, right time a little bit.
How do you go from literally a young kid just trying to do anything to being like, "Oh, I actually know what I'm doing. I know how to evaluate who is a good talent and who's an average talent"?
I think always feeling like I didn't know and asking a lot of questions. And I was always, growing up, honestly, I was always reading the draft guides. Middle school, even elementary school, I begged my mom to buy it was the Joel Bucksbaum, like Pro Football Weekly, something draft guide. And I would get it mailed to my house and I'd just read it religiously. So always kept learning. Even now, I'm always asking people who know more than me about evaluation. So at some point after I had maybe was right on a couple things, I started to feel like, okay, I at least know somewhat of what I'm talking about, but it was just a complete learning process.
If someone doesn't like an evaluation and they say, "Well, what do you know? You never played at a high level." What's your comeback line?
Well, a lot of people don't know. I did play growing up. I never got to the college level, but played all through. So I have put on the pads a little bit here and there. But I also think that when you look in the NFL, I look at the personnel departments, look at even the head coaches. Not every head coach in the NFL played football at all, let alone at a high level. Bill Belichick did play football, but it's not like he was the greatest player himself. I think it's different skill sets, right? Being able to play, there's a very physical component to that. Being 6'6", 250 pounds doesn't necessarily help you be a better evaluator. So I always say there's two different skill sets for 2 different jobs.
That's a good answer. If you had to put a number on it nowadays, not when you were in 8th grade, but nowadays, how many kids are you analyzing in any given class?
Oh boy. As a company, we're like well into the thousands. Me personally, in my region, hundreds for sure. So I would guess somewhere we have 100 and some kids ranked just in the state of Michigan and 100 something in Ohio. So I would have to think I'm over 500 just in my region. And then when I dip over and help the other, we all kind of have checks and balances where we check each other's regions. So I guess we're still all pushing close to 1,000 huddle tapes that we've watched in a given class.
Yeah. So you mentioned huddle tapes. So what percentage of when you're watching something is on tape as opposed to being there live? Are any analysis done live, or is it all we want to have it on tape so we can stop and look back, et cetera?
I think our goal, at least for the top end guys, is to see them all in person at some point. Now, that's not always in games. It's just impossible with that many weeks in the season. So you have so many game weeks that we go, and we have to try to hit multiple games. So plan, you can make a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. Otherwise, hope to see the kids at a camp 7-on-7, even if we have to stop by the school. I think, COVID had changed that a lot because we weren't going out as much going into schools. Before that, I think we were hitting a pretty high percentage of at least seeing the kid in person, meeting them in person, at least seeing what they look like physically. And then a lot of the times, at least being able to see them run around and go through a workout, if not in a 7-on-7 or in a game or something.
And what's the value? Why is it better to try to see them in person?
Well, I think highlight tape, first of all, can be a little bit deceiving because it is just the best plays. It's hard to know that. You don't see a lot of the deficiencies, right? You're just comparing who has the best highlight tape. So seeing them in person, I think you get to see what they do, depending on the position, when they don't have the ball, when they're not making a highlight play. And sometimes, like for a running back, for instance, the run that may translate the best is a 4 or 5 yard run between the tackles that doesn't show up on a highlight tape. We don't necessarily see how a kid grinds out yardage. You also don't necessarily know situational football on the highlight tape. Did this quarterback make a great throw on 3rd and 17 when his team needed it, or was that a garbage touchdown at the end of the game they were losing? You don't know those things. And then I think seeing what they're built like, kids do lie on their heights and weights, Mike. It happens. So being able to verify that helps. And then just I think there's some just general feel for being there in person with a kid.
Best player you ever saw in person play high school ball?
The first year that I went to the Under Armour All-America game, this was the first year I'd ever been exposed to kids of that level. The two receivers on the one team were Julio Jones and AJ Green. And I kind of went, oh my gosh, I'm coming from my little West Michigan bubble, had played against or seen some good players in this area. And then when I saw those guys, it was like, wow, this is what's out. These guys are 17, 18-year-olds. So I think still to this day, when I get asked that question, those are the first two guys that spring to mind. I mean, they're both still playing football. So I think of those two right away.
That's impressive. I'm testing your memory, so it's okay if the answer is not there, because I have a terrible memory, and you've been doing this for a long time with thousands of guys. But can you give me an example of a guy that you personally liked that maybe the world didn't say, oh, he's definitely a 5-star, but you're like, no, I'm telling you he's good, and then he did end up turning out to be really good?
I think the best example of that, and I wish I had trusted myself and ranked him higher, is Corey Davis. He had his high school quarterback went to Illinois, Riley O'Toole. You may remember Riley at Illinois. And we were scouting Riley, and I went to see Riley, and I saw the receiver catching the balls. And I was, that guy is, I asked, does he have any offers? He had no offers. I sent the link out to a bunch of places and people that I knew and trusted. So, can somebody tell me what's wrong here? And nobody ever really got back to me. It was kind of real late in the cycle. So he ends up going to Western Michigan. And I think I might be pretty good there. Why don't we kind of slap like a middling 3-star on him and see how this goes? And then he becomes a 1st-round pick. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I should have rolled the dice a little bit there. But he's the one that most comes to mind where I just couldn't figure out what was wrong.
Yeah. Well, how does that work? Like, how does a star ranking come to be? Is there some sort of a formula or math behind it? Or is it literally just, you've seen enough, you got to trust your gut? I say 4-star.
It's more of the second, more of the latter. I think people think it's formulaic. It's not like we punch in number of offers with yards that you accumulated or whatever, and it spits out the rating. We assign it, and a team of us does it. Contrary to popular belief, I don't just sit here and do them all myself. We have like I said, a checks and balances system. And then we have 3 people whose entire job it is just scouting. They don't chase down where they're going or anything like that. They're just watching tape and checking over my evaluations. And I think now having, years and years of experience to be able to say, this is what the bottom of the forest looked like. This is what the middle of the forest looked like. And having some of that cross comparison to say, this is what we rated a 90 in the past. This is where we were right and wrong. We can now fit them into those boxes based on what we know of the past. And I think we've all gotten much better at it, honestly, over the years.
But you can't go rogue. Like, obviously you'd want to burn the whole city down, but you can't say, no, this guy that nobody likes, I'm saying a 5-star, and he becomes it. There are multiple other people who have to come close or agree with your ranking before it gets that designation.
Yeah, I think that over the years, I've built up some ability, they have some trust in me to because of the Corey Davises, and there's been some other guys that have been on the table on for that that have turned out to where I have some influence there. But yeah, it's not, I've been voted down plenty of times before too. So it's not just me, but I do get to give generally an initial rating. We like to start guys. A lot of guys start kind of in the middle or the bottom of the threes, and then we move them up as we find out more about that. And so I do have a say in how those guys are ordered, and particularly within the states that I cover, kind of the order that they go in. I don't usually get too much pushback or anybody changing those up too much.
How often do you get a pitch from a mom, a dad, a coach in high school to say, no, you got my guy wrong. He's got to be a blank rating instead of what you have him?
It's probably happened like 10 times since I silenced my phone to go on this show. It happens all the time. I mean, it's constant. Constantly wanting to be reevaluated. Constantly, I get some really good pitches. People put together video of like, here's me going against a guy that you have higher. Here's my stats versus this. I mean, people put together some really nice presentations, and I try to look at all of them. I mean, honestly, I almost can't get to all of them, but it does happen pretty regularly.
Can you remember one in particular, like a pitch that stood out that was either funny or ridiculous or that swayed you completely?
Not necessarily. I can remember some that I ignored that I wish I hadn't.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, man. I still have an email from TJ Watt's dad where he wasn't real happy with us. And as a Steelers fan, I'm happy every time he gets a sack, but I'm also like, oh man, I should have probably read that email through a little bit more.
He turned out okay.
He did turn out okay. That's like probably the number one with a bullet. I screwed that one up. We should have listened.
Yeah. Well, in that case, I hope he plays another 15 years so that we can.
I should really frame that email and have it back here.
You absolutely should, just to keep you humble, keep you centered.
Oh, yeah. Oh, listen, I have plenty of people in my life professionally and personally to keep me humble.
Right. Yeah. You're married. You have kids. We get it. You got no big head for you. How is Big Ten recruiting now different from when you started focusing on the league?
I think things move faster, for one thing. The Big Ten has kind of joined the arms race, and I knew that was happening a couple of years ago when Iowa took a commitment from Aaron Graves when he was a freshman. And Iowa traditionally, Iowa, Wisconsin, schools like that were always, let's wait, let's offer guys late, let's not jump in on freshmen, sophomores, even sometimes juniors to an extent. I think those schools still stick to their formula, but they offer more young players and underclassmen than ever before. So I think that the league, along with the rest of the country, has sped up. I always thought the Big Ten would kind of be last to take part in offering, sophomores and all that, but they're doing more of that. I cover more of that than ever before.
Is there an underrated state in terms of recruiting? Like, we know that the South has tons of kids, and in the Midwest, Pennsylvania and Ohio have an awful lot. Is there one that you go, this state people overlook and they shouldn't?
I think that maybe not just one, but that whole kind of upper ring of Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, there's always NFL players coming out of there, and the states don't produce like tons and tons of Power 5 guys. But when they do, when you look at the hit rate of the guys that are out of there, and even the ones that get missed, the ones that bounce out of there and go to North Dakota State, or the ones that have to walk on at Wisconsin, Iowa, or Minnesota, there's a shocking number of those guys who were walk-ons or were lower ranked recruits who end up playing on Sundays.
Yeah. Speaking of states, so for a while now, the South has produced more elite players than any other region in the country, and it's not going away. What are the reasons for that? For somebody who doesn't follow recruiting, but they see, boy, so many kids in Florida and in Texas and Georgia and Alabama are consistently really good. Some come to the Big Ten and some don't. But why is that region in particular so, full of wealth when it comes to talented players?
I don't know that I have a concrete answer. There's a lot of theories, right? A lot of people up here like to say it's because of year-round football. Those guys are training. Those guys are playing football in the spring. Florida has spring football. Other states, the kids are able to get outside and throw the football around, do 7-on-7s. But I think up here we're starting to do more of that because there's more indoor space. Right. It does cost money, but the kids are finding ways to make that happen. I think that people have talked about population, and so there's that. I think some of it has to honestly come down to, I guess it's just gene pool purely. If you're pumping out that many athletes per year and those athletes are coming back and having children and those children are going to be big and athletic, there's got to be something to that also. So I don't know that I have a firm answer. It might be a combination of all of those factors, honestly.
If there was one thing you'd like to change about recruiting, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think that the rules are a little bit too stringent, like right now during the recruiting process, during this part of the year, about coaches coming into the school. Coaches come into the school, they have this bump rule where you're supposed to I just happened to run into your star recruit in the hallways, and I guess I can say a couple words to them. Like these kids now, then you're asking them to then go visit schools all across the country on their own dime to talk to these coaches. It's like these coaches have flown here to talk to them. Just let them have the conversation. And I get that you don't want them, being pulled out of school all day, but I think that rule would really help a lot of kids be able to make their decisions sooner. Something's got to be done about this portal too. There's so many guys in it. They're not getting out of there. It's hurting high school recruiting. I don't know what the solution is, but something clearly has to. There's going to come to a crossroads with the portal and high school recruiting pretty soon here, I think.
Now, we're going to have plenty more insight on recruiting from you on our signing day show. But let's get to some of the fun stuff. You and I had a nice bond early on because for a long time in my 20s and early 30s, when I wasn't doing sportscasting, I was doing improv comedy. You didn't do improv, but you've done stand-up for a long time. When did you first start doing stand-up comedy?
So I actually, look at this. That's the last Lakers standing competition I did in college. This was the first time I ever did stand-up. Just thought I would try it, and I won the contest. And so that was 2007. And the guy that hosted it, his name's Pete Dominic. I think he's on Sirius now. He's done some stuff on CNN. He was the host, and he said, hey, why don't you come out to New York if you're really interested in pursuing this, and I'll take you around to some clubs and show you the ropes. And he probably thought there's no way this kid's going to come from Allendale, Michigan to New York City this following spring. But there I was. And that's kind of how I got him. He took me to a bunch of clubs. I performed at the Laugh Factory. That was my third time on stage. I went from 2 shows at my college rec room to Laugh Factory in Times Square.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. What was your material back then, and how does it compare to your material now?
My material back then was all based around my college and my school. So when I tell you no one in New York City got it, no one in New York City got it. It's like, hey, don't you guys hate it when you're crossing the bridge on the other side of campus? And so that was like, I probably got to expand what I'm writing about here. So when you first start, there's no, for me, there was no like, this is what my material is like. It's just anything you can find. It's just like, please be able to fill time at that point. Now, a lot of it for me is based on family. Children give you a lot of material, as I'm sure you're very aware of. I try to sprinkle in some current events, try to talk a lot about growing up. I really don't I don't blend the two at all. I don't really ever talk about my job or football on stage, honestly.
How would you, if someone hasn't seen your act, how would you describe your style on stage?
I think I'm pretty like laid back and reserved. I think I try to let the material speak for itself. I'm not really this guy who's jumping around up there a bunch. I'd like to think it's cerebral. I think every comic wants to think that they're doing like smarter material. I hope that I succeed in that. So, I would say it's more cerebral material about, kids and growing up and all that.
And we mentioned you have kids. We mentioned you have a wife. We mentioned you have a full-time job. So how often are you getting out there on stage and doing shows?
I have a great agency that books me who understands all of these things. And so they just sort of throw stuff at me and I accept or don't accept. I did a show last night. So sometimes if it's local here, I can just get everything done. Everyone's in bed. I can pop out and do it. I would say every couple weeks, with certain pockets of the year when recruiting's dead, where I can do more.
Yeah. I just watched the new Aziz Ansari on Netflix last night. Do you find, and again, stand-up was never my skill set. That wasn't a muscle that I was good at flexing. But do you find like you like watching other stand-ups either for entertainment purposes or to study, or are you sort of like, I just don't want anything somebody else does to seep into what I do?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful of that for sure. But I do like watching it. It inspires me, especially because I don't do it full time. I get kind of out of the loop. I get it's like sitting on the bench for too long. I get cold, and I need to get kind of invigorated or re-inspired to write sometimes. And it helps to hear other people's material. Not like I'm taking that, but it just gets the juices flowing a little bit, and it also keeps it current because you can stay away from stand up for a couple of years. And I turn around and like, there's a lot of younger people coming in with different styles and different ways of looking at things, and I don't ever want to become like the old stale guy. Right. So I try to keep it current, and that helps. So I do like watching it. I've become desensitized to the point where it's hard to watch it just as entertainment, but there's enough like really good stand-ups out there that but it takes that like almost top level for me to watch it as entertainment. Otherwise I'm always like, why? And the scout in me is always kind of breaking down. Here's this comedian's strengths and weaknesses.
You've opened for big names, whether it's especially in the stand-up world, Tim Meadows, Maria Bamford, Pete Holmes, Chris Titus. What has that been like? Like, do you try to go, I'm going to go try to have a drink with that person afterwards just for the story or to maybe learn something? Or are you sort of like, we're professional, we all do our own thing. If I was buddies with them, it'd be one thing, but.
I'm pretty bad at like that networking part of it. I think I don't like to be the annoying person who's like, hey, please come hang out with me after this. If it happens organically, I'd like to think that I have a good feel to for whether or not that person's interested or whether they just want to go back to their hotel.
Right.
So I've probably not been as aggressive on that part of it as I need to, but I've had some good experiences with those folks. And we're lucky enough to have a big festival here in Grand Rapids where a lot of the time they're just hanging out and don't have anywhere to be anyway. But I'm not typically like, hey, go have breakfast with me.
Well, you should, because what if they say yes? Did I ever tell you my Frank Caliendo story?
No, maybe you did, but
I might have. So I'm in Charlotte in like 05, 06 or something. And it was 05. It was right when we launched ESPNU and they have one big comedy club in Charlotte. And so I went to go see Frank Caliendo because he was, he wasn't what he is now, but he was a big name and he had these great impressions. And I was like, oh, I'd love to see his show. And so I go see his show. And as I check in, the guy who owns the club, or the guy who manages the club, his name is Mike Hall. And so when I was trying to get my tickets, the guy at the front desk kind of gave me a hard time. And finally this guy comes over and he goes, what's the problem? I go, nothing. I'm just trying to get my tickets. What's your name? Mike Hall. He goes, hey, I'm Mike Hall. Well, he happened to be a sports fan. And so he knew who I was. And so he was like, oh, where are you sitting? No, forget this. I'm putting you in the front row. Come on over here, man. You got to stay afterwards. I'm going to introduce you to Frank. So I was like, okay, great. So, we talked. I was by myself. I was a loner, 23. I had no girlfriend or anything. So I was just by myself, have a few drinks, and I'm chatting with him and I'm explaining my situation, how I just moved to town, yada, yada. So Frank does the show. It's spotless. I mean, 90 minutes of not 20 seconds went by without an excellent joke. He was fantastic. And I meet him afterwards and he tells me the story about that. They almost did a bit on Mad TV when he was on that about Dream Job. They were going to have him be Terry Bradshaw auditioning for Dream Job. And it was like, oh, this is crazy. So anyways, as I'm leaving, the guy, Mike Hall, who was a great dude to me, but as I was leaving, he was like, well, you got to open up for Frank tomorrow. He's here all weekend. And I go, oh, I don't do stand-up. And he was like, hey, man, you were the one saying you're new in town. You need to meet people. This is the best way to do it. And I was like, oh, crap, he's right. I got to do this. And like you as an 8th grader or you as a young person, like you have that confidence of like, screw it, I'll try it. So I spent like all night just trying to think of material. And I was not a stand-up comedian. And I had like a few like average impressions that would work in like a college improv group. And I was like, oh, I'll just mix those around. And I thought of some jokes and I came up with 5 minutes. And so I ended up opening for Caliendo right before he comes on stage. And I got 5 minutes of material and I practiced it and I timed it. And about 90 seconds in, I get the flashlight in the back, which, as you know, means you're done. Your time's up. And I was like, there's no way that's 5 minutes. And so I come off stage and I did it by trying to do a joke because I could do the voice of Saturday Night Live's voiceover guy for a long time. And he was on Mad TV. And I was like, oh, that'd be kind of funny if I, did that sort of a riff. And I couldn't think of it. I froze on stage and I just blanked and it was not good. And I walked off stage and Frank was a total pro. He spent like 30 seconds being like, how great was Mike? Huh? He's so good. Awesome. And I go back and talk to Mike Hahn. He's like, oh, Frank is pissed at you. And I was like, what? He goes, you can't do impressions before an impressionist. And I was like, I didn't know. Who told me I didn't do improv. I didn't do stand-up. And I met him afterwards and he was perfectly fine about the whole thing. But I was like, I absolutely infuriated Frank Caliendo one night. And I have that for the rest of my life.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah.
First of all. And that is kind of an unwritten rule. It's to the point where somebody asked me, like, somebody will call me up and go like, hey, you want to open for Bobby Lee? And I'm like, does Bobby know that? Because Asian comedian for Asian comedian, it's the same deal. You just you want some element of surprise there, right? So that's but hey, that makes for a great story.
It does. It's well worth it. I'm glad it happened. Favorite comedian you've met, even not that you necessarily became buddies with, but that you had a nice chat with at some point.
Oh man, I loved Bill Burr, and he's one of my favorite comics anyway. And then when he was here in Grand Rapids, he was just the most normal guy ever. He's just hanging out, eating a quesadilla, asking me about whatever boxing fight was on that night, and just an extremely normal guy for his level of notoriety.
That's awesome. Who would make a better stand-up, DiNardo or Griffith?
Oh, I think DiNardo. He's got some natural tendencies towards being funny. There's some shtick there with the old guy. Well,
and you're being polite. There's some loose screws. Let's be honest.
Yeah. I am being polite. I'm going to see him in several days here. So
all right, you've still got more prep to do, so we'll wrap up soon. But before you go, 4 questions unrelated to anything. You ready?
Yep, ready.
If you could have had the career of one comedian, who would it have been?
Ooh, I'm going to pick, this is going to be kind of an off the wall one, maybe a little bit, but Donald Glover used to do stand up.
I love that.
And the guy is on TV. He's in movies. He gets to voice Spider-Man characters, and he's a rapper. Like there's just too much talent there. It's borderline annoying. So he's who I would pick.
Remember, he got like hired to be a 30 Rock writer, and it was like a big deal. And then like he didn't even last there a year because all these other entities were like, no, you're too good. We're going to take you away from that.
Yeah, and then like a year, I hadn't put it together when he first came out that Childish Gambino was the same guy. So I'm like, I like this music. And then he comes out with like a funk album, and then he's doing like R&B covers. He's singing now, and I'm like, good. This guy is it's too much. So yeah. He's an easy choice for me.
Number 2, the last good book you read.
Last good book I read. I don't read a whole lot of books. My wife is on my case all the time. So I don't know if I really have an answer there. Don't read, it's probably a sports book. You know what I read? I read Muck City, which is about recruiting down in Florida in like Pahokee and that area. And it's the muck, and they like chase rabbits in order to improve their quickness, like through the muck and all that. Yeah, that was probably the last one I read that I was like, okay, I like this.
Number 3, give me the first thing that comes to mind when I say the last time one of your kids did something that cracked you up.
Ooh, last week, my daughter asked me to rap battle her as characters. So I was Godzilla. She was King Kong. Or no, I was King Kong and she was Godzilla, and she rap battled me as if I was King Kong, and she absolutely slayed me.
Please tell me at least you or your wife recorded that just for you guys.
Oh, it's out there on social media. People have been commenting on that.
Number 4, why do you keep coming back and doing TV with me every year?
You're the reason for that. It's so much fun. What else would I be doing on signing day? It's not like there's a million other responsibilities that I'd have. I think that I do it for the free hotel room in Chicago the night before. I get to get away from my family and just write articles. And it's so nice once I get there and check in. I'm like, I can just write all these articles without anybody bugging me. But no, you guys are listen. You talked about me going to the combine and doing stand up and all those things. Year one, super intimidating. I think I was 22, 23. Howard's won a Super Bowl. Jerry's coached all these years, and I'm going like, I gotta tell these guys what I think about a couple of recruits here.
Yeah. Well, you hung from day one. We remember that. We were all impressed that first time. But I do love your first answer. There's nothing to a parent of young children like a quiet night away from your kids.
That hotel room is, I always send a picture of it to my wife and she gets all angry. I'm like, look at this room I've got. Just kicking my feet up. I got the invention of Grubhub too. Like, oh man, I don't even have to leave here. I'm just going to get something delivered. It's great.
Alan, you're fun. I'll see you on signing day.
If BTN HR is listening, if that room ever goes away, you're going to have to find another recruiting analyst. I'm just saying that now.
Thanks for the time, man. I'll see you soon.
Anytime. I'll see you.
That was Alan. Pretty fascinating guy, no? Lots of fun to hang out with. My thanks to him for joining us. Hope to see you on our signing day show this year and every year. From the Big Ten Network in Chicago, I'm Mike Hall. We'll see you next time.